Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Slightly Mental Podcast. After a long break, I have started recording the second season, and my guest could not be anybody else but Mr. Steve Carr. Hello, Steve. How are you today?
Hi, Sam. I'm really well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me back. Do you know, I've got a question straight off the cuff, ready for
Wow.
you. Got a
Flipping the
question.
roles straight away. Go on.
Yeah, yeah. When you announced the name of the show, wow, where did that come from? Slightly mental.
Oh dear. I wasn't prepared for that. Okay, so first of all, there's a lot of my sense of humor in that. Plus challenging the narrative because I feel like there's a divide that some people, the old sort of believe that some people have mental health, some people don't. We all have mental health. The difference is that some
Mm.
people have mental ill health. Um, but I also feel like we all have that spark of insanity, the little bit of craziness within us. And I would say that we all slightly mental in our own little way, which makes us all unique and individual and interesting. So I just wanted to have a title that will challenge how we look not only at mental health, but also at ourselves and each other. So I think
Mm.
that's a suitable title or a name of a podcast, should I say.
Yeah. Sorry to throw that question out straight away, and you probably were not expecting that, but thank you for answering.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, before we start, you promised to be nice and not challenge me, but there we go.
Yeah,
Out,
sorry.
out of the window straight away. I'm just kidding. No,
Okay, enough with my
it was
questions.
really, really good start. So let me properly introduce you. You are a multiple award-winning mental health first aid instructor. You do a lot of suicide first aid training as well. You do a lot of work in terms of workplace well-being. You also like flying planes. You also like riding bikes and running a lot. A very active person. I would first like to talk about your personal story, because, like most trainers that I've met, you have a personal story with mental health. And my first question would be, where did your challenges start?
Oh gosh, really good question. This all stems for me. My journey into mental health was came about 7 years ago when I experienced a mental health breakdown in the workplace, or so I thought was 7 years ago. It actually stems from childhood. I had a fairly traumatic childhood, both emotionally and physically. My parents were both emotionally abusive and physically abusive, but also they're emotionally unavailable. So for me, I didn't really have any understanding of what it was to be heard, loved, or what I thought was love in the sense that I wanted it. Um, but also, I had no real understanding of what I was experiencing as a child. And so I had nobody to talk to. I just thought life was this way, that it was difficult. My parents had difficult upbringing, and then it was conditioned into me to live the same kind of life and their beliefs and how their lives were. So it was growing up in poverty. We grew up in a place called Swindon, and you know it well. A place called Swindon. So for those that are listening in, it's a small town in between, sandwiched between Bristol and Reading. Grew up on a council estate with in a working class family. My elder brother Paul, who was a year older than me, younger sister Claire, who's a year younger, and my mum was a stay-at-home housewife. My dad was a car mechanic by trade, and we were no strangers to hardship. I just recall on weekends we'd be dragged to the local tip, and my dad would salvage anything that he could repair. So, you know, we'd often find bicycles, radios, televisions. He was very good with his hands. He was very good with electronics. So, yeah, more often than not, you'd find a semi-sprayed television or bike in the kitchen being repaired. But you know what? It fed us as children, and my dad was really resourceful. So he would build custom motorbikes, fix people's televisions, cars, and things just to get by. A Sunday lunch, we would find we'd be eating it for the next week after that, and you know, bread and dripping sandwiches and the, you know, leftovers. And sometimes we'd have lemon curd and even crisp sandwiches. That's the kind of, the upbringing that we had. It was very difficult. By the age of 14, I started associating with children that were like young people my age, that were from the same backgrounds. So from either broken homes or from traumatic experiences. We all kind of had the same thing in common. We were in some kind of pain and some kind of suffering. And by the age of 14, I had found drugs. I'd been introduced to drugs and started using marijuana just as a way of being able to cope, really. It was an escape more than anything else, but also to self-medicate some of this pain that I was experiencing as a young adult. And so that was my start of my journey into using illegal drugs. And this continued all the way up. Well, it continued for most of my adult life until I was actually 39, which was just 6 years ago. I smoked from the age of 14, took drugs and drank at a very young age. And at the age of 39, it all came to a head. But before that, an event that has just passed, the anniversary of it has just passed, was sadly the death of my elder brother in 1991, who was killed in a freak car accident by a drink driver along with 5 other children. The accident in question was the Acres Way accident in Swindon, where 5 children were sat on a bench and sadly were killed by 2 drink drivers who thought it'd be an idea to drive home after having a few drinks, which resulted in the death of 5 children. At the time, sadly, there was no help available that my dad wanted to accept. We look back even just 5 years ago. Could we have that conversation about mental health like we are having now quite openly? Absolutely not. So, back in 1991, which was 31 years ago, it's not the kind of thing that we could have. So my dad was in fear of, being looked at, that he was weak. He was a very proud man. He himself didn't know how to ask for help. And so as a result of that, us children, myself and my younger sister, sadly, we couldn't get the help that we needed at the time either. So not being able to talk about that traumatic event, or let alone process it, had its repercussions later on in life, which at the age of 39, all the unhelpful coping strategies and masking and techniques that I was using finally came to a head. It finally came to a head when I experienced the mental health breakdown or crisis in the workplace, which ultimately led me to attempt to end my life by suicide just less than a month later.
Wow. As a result of those, you're very open about that. As a result of all those problems in childhood and growing up, you have been diagnosed with quite a few conditions, haven't you?
Yeah, so when I eventually asked for help, the first thing that I was met with was a positive response, and I think that made all of the difference. As soon as I was able to muster the courage to speak about my mental health, I thought that it would be met with the standard response of, oh, well, there's an X amount of waiting list, don't really believe you, can't see it, so it's not real, that kind of thing, which sadly is fairly common, but also prevents people from asking for help. My experience was completely different to this. The very first thing my GP said to me when I asked for the help was thank you. And it's those two words that were so powerful that changed the course of my recovery journey. Now, it wasn't always that easy and simple and straightforward after seeing my GP, but because of my GP, it enabled me then to go and get further help. So it was within a month or so that I gained a diagnosis of PTSD, high function anxiety, work-related stress, depression, unresolved childhood trauma, and addiction, all in one go. So it was a lot to deal with, but for me, it didn't dictate who I was, and it didn't say, well, okay, well, you've now got this diagnosis, this is who you are. It actually enabled me to say, I've got the diagnosis, now I know how to manage the symptoms of the diagnosis. So I didn't let it, to control me or who I was or what I did. If anything, it allowed me to explore, where did it come from in the first place? how did that happen? How can I recover from this holistically?
Which is a really good approach. I think a lot of people, when they get mental health diagnosis, they identify with the diagnosis. My experience was that very often people will resist help and even feel like you're attacking them when you try to help them. I know my journey started with teaching people about anxiety, and I wanted to reach out to a group of people and even coach them for free personally. And a lot of people were just very defensive, like I wanted to take something away from them. They identify with the condition so strongly. Yeah. If you feel comfortable, I would like to ask you about your suicide attempt. Um,
Mm.
if I correctly remember, you have used cocaine, is that correct?
Yeah, I did. So cocaine was my drug of choice. What I'll say and I'll express at this point is because of I'm unsure of where your listeners are with their
Hmm.
journey is I won't go into any explicit details of what, how, or when or
Yeah,
why, just quite simply because I don't think people need to know the what, how, or when or
yeah,
why.
yeah,
But I will just say it did involve drugs and it involved a lot of alcohol. But I won't go into specifics just because just being mindful of,
yeah.
triggering anyone else. I think, just knowing that somebody like myself had attempted suicide, I think that's enough that people need to know.
Yeah, totally. I agree. I agree. Um, what would you say were the things that were key in your recovery, things that help you the most?
Hmm. It's a really good question, this, and it's something that very rarely get an opportunity to discuss. For me, first of all, it was being believed. So it was having that belief from my GPs. So that she validated my experience, feelings, and thoughts just by thanking me. So this was enough, just having somebody thank me. Secondly, it was knowing somebody that would believe me. So my journey of recovery actually started in a church. And it was this my rationale behind this was if I could tell people in a church what happened, maybe I can then ask for forgiveness within the church, be forgiven for all of the things that I had put people through as well, because I wasn't, it wasn't as straightforward as me just taking drugs. I hurt a lot of people, and I
Mhm.
know this. And I needed to ask for forgiveness from them and from other people. And I thought, where's the best place to do this? And for me, it started in church. So I remember on my third suicide attempt, I said, if I survive this one, I'll start praying to God and I'll start going to church and I will start asking for forgiveness. So basically, what I was doing at this point, unbeknown to me, there's something called a 12-step program,
Mhm.
which is for anybody that's in recovery. So is mainly used for people that have been drinking. For anybody in recovery, and what I was unaware of was this was one of the 12 steps was asking for forgiveness. And so I was applying the 12 steps before even being aware of what the 12 steps were. So my journey started with somebody allowing me to be heard. So they allowed me to be heard. And then from there on, it became a little bit easier with asking for help because I thought, well, if these guys listen, if these people listen, surely everybody will. And this is where my journey began in the church. But also, I thought, well, maybe if I go and speak to lots of different people across the entire country, and that's where the Walk in England, the entire length of Britain, Land's End, John Groats come from. I thought, well, if I can ask for different forms of help from different people, let's go and see what help is out there. Let's go and see why people can't access this help. Let's go and see if there's other Steves out there with voices that are not being heard, the silent sufferers, as it were, and go and raise awareness for mental health and homelessness. It's coming from a guy, you know how difficult it can be
Mm.
because from a very young age, we're conditioned, especially when we fall over or hurt ourselves. What do our parents lovingly say?
Just shrug it off and keep going. Come on. Stop
Yeah,
crying.
big
There's
boy.
nothing to cry about. If you
Yeah,
want, I'll give you
that's
something to cry about.
that's actually what my mum said to me. Interestingly enough, I'll tell you a quick story around this. So my brother and I are playing with a tennis ball in the back garden, and we're throwing this tennis ball to each other. And we're about 7 years old. We're playing ball in the back garden, and all that separated the two gardens was about a foot high of chicken wire. Oh yeah, we were not posh. We didn't have fences. So anyway, my brother's thrown me this ball. It's gone into the next door neighbour's garden, and the next door neighbour used to throw and smash glass bottles in the garden before they moved out. So anyway, all this glass in next door neighbour's garden. I've gone to get the ball that's in the neighbour's garden, forgotten about the chicken wire, and tripped over and fell into my next door neighbour's garden. Anyway, I'm falling in and literally falling on a shard of glass. So there's this shard of glass hanging out my hand. 7-year-old Steve, carefully, mind you, goes back into the garden, steps over the chicken wire, into the kitchen where mum is, blood everywhere, bawling my eyes out, crying, "Mum, mum, look, look." So mum elevates my hand, gets the kitchen sink plug, pops it into the kitchen sink, starts to run warm water. Then she grabs my hand and yanks a piece of glass out. Absolute tears, floods everywhere. And my mum said this to me. She said, 7-year-old Steve, crying, blood everywhere, she said, "Stop crying," or what was it you said?
I give you something to cry about.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I didn't have enough, mum.
Yeah.
There was mum at 7 years of age telling me not to cry. So that's exactly what I did. Stop crying. And from
Yeah.
that age onwards, I began to mask everything, the pain, and every time that I wanted to cry, because I was told, big boys don't cry.
Yeah.
Stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about.
And it's incredible. Recently, I got interested more about trauma and how actually experiences in the childhood that might seem like they're meaningless will have a serious effect on us as adults. Because I see a lot of stuff from myself, and even my mother, I love her to bits, but she was working 24/7 to make sure that we survive. And you have to sacrifice one thing for another. So you didn't get attention from a parent, you didn't get, you have not been heard, you had no opportunity to talk about your emotions and stuff. So it's incredible how something that's seemingly trivial by somebody who's an adult for a child is a big deal, and it can create trauma and more serious problems in the adulthood. You mentioned
Yeah.
yeah. You mentioned your trip from one end of UK to the other. How long did that take you to walk?
Yeah, 90 days in total, 3 months. Wild camping, just sleeping in a sleeping bag. More often than not, I would wake up and the tent would be frozen. So I'd have to wait until it like warmed up. I remember when I got down to Penzance and I was walking along, it was Fistral Beach. And I'm walking along Fistral Beach and I see this really flat piece of land. And I thought, wonderful, looks like a pretty good place to pitch the tent. I'll pitch it up. So I put my tent up, bearing in mind it's about 11 o'clock at night, hammering down with rain, and it's cold. It's the beginning of, it's February, sometime in February. I think it was the beginning of February that I started the walk, beginning of February, March, April. Yeah, beginning of February. So it's still cold, very bitterly cold. It's raining, and all I wanted to do was get out of this wet gear that I'm in. So I see this flat piece of land, wonderful, pitch the tent. So I'm in the tent, freezing, cold, and I don't know whether I was shivering from the withdrawal from all the drugs or whether it was cold. I can't work it out. But either way, I was shivering. Anyway, it was about 6 o'clock the next morning and it stopped raining, but there was a mist just covering this land. And I got out the tent and had a look around and I see this figure walking towards me. I thought, 6 o'clock in the morning. Wow, who would be up in this? It was like pitch black. He's walking towards me and I'm starting to pack the tent up. And he said, "Excuse me, sir, what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, just packing my tent up." And he said, "Do you know where you are?" "Fistral Beach." He went, "Nearly." He said, "You're on the golf course of Fistral Golf Course." I said, "I wondered why this land was really flat." And he said, "Yeah, you might want to leave pretty quick." So they're teeing off shortly. Couldn't believe it. I was on a golf course. Unbelievable.
So
But
you
it was
were,
flat.
yeah, perfect. A nice grass, I would assume.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
You were walking by a golfer. Have you ever been woken up by a wild animal on your trip?
Oh gosh, yeah. More often than not. Actually, probably not woken up, but kept awake by wild
Okay.
animals. There was some absolutely amazing experiences. One of the very first nights, it was there's a dual carriageway right down at the end by Penzance, and I camped on the dual carriageway, literally next to it. There was a dip just next to the dual carriageway, and I thought, well, I'll just camp here right next to it. Really bad idea. Really bad idea because A, the traffic, but B, it was in a dip and it rained that night. So
Mm.
got a little bit wet. Another one that almost sounds amazing. I romanticized this was camping on the beach. I thought that would be amazing. Let's camp on the beach. I would not recommend it to anybody, especially if it's shingled beach. Oh my gosh. Try and pitch a tent on a shingled beach and then listening to that all night, the waves crashing and coming back and forth was not my idea of heaven.
I can imagine that was probably not the most comfortable ground to lie on either.
No, it wasn't. It was absolutely not. No, if you've ever tried laying on a shingle beach, then oh my gosh, you'll know just how painful that was. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. Have you had any scary stories during that 90 days? Anything that stands
Um,
out?
there was a story of the very first night, not so much scary, but more tragic, I think.
Okay.
Just before I went away on the walk, there was I was connected with somebody that worked at Shaw Trust, and what she did at Shaw Trust was she enabled people that experienced poor mental health and mental illness a pathway to back into work, so they would gain the relevant skills to go back into the workplace. And I remember delivering a talk, letting them know that I was going to walk Land's End to John Groats, and she said, that's absolutely amazing given what you just experienced. Do you mind if we keep in touch? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So we kept in touch. And I remember I left that night and I said, I'll contact you Monday to let you know how I get on, how we start. And we spoke on the Friday. So anyway, I'm down in Penzance on the beach, on the shingle beach. I get my very first tent, and it wasn't a very good tent because I get my very first tent out of its packaging, and within minutes I put the poles straight through the tent and it had ripped. So very first night, I'm in a tent that is the equivalent of a crisp packet, and it's broken. So I then get a call. It's about 10 o'clock in the evening. I get a call from somebody that is helping support me that was helping support me on the journey. It was a mutual friend of the woman in question called Sabrina, who I met for Shaw Trust. And he said, Steve, where are you? And I said, down in Penzance. And he said, you'll need to sit down. I said, oh, okay. What is it? And he said, it's Sabrina. He said, sadly, she had a heart attack earlier on this evening and she passed away. Now, the worst thing about that was she was only 36 years of age.
Wow.
And it was a really tragic way to start the walk with the bad news that somebody that I'd met a couple of weeks before, she had been really ill. She had been really ill, but experienced a heart attack. And I believe that she was with me and looking over me for the entirety of that journey. Because there was many events on that journey where, I got hit by a car at one point, not excessive speed, but still hit by a car. I had frozen most nights, down to -2 or 3, and I survived it. Most people would go, you know what, I'll find a hotel.
Yeah.
And I probably would now, if I'm honest. But what amazes me, Sam, is how much we can not just only put our bodies through, but what our minds will allow us to do
Mm.
and what we're capable of. If you said to me now, Steve, do you want to go and walk Britain with me? It might dip down to -3. You might freeze. You're going to absolutely soak through. You're going to have to carry a 25-kilogram backpack. What do you reckon? Sam, I'd say no. I would say no.
Yeah.
But isn't it amazing, though, when you think about where do you have to be mentally to do that challenge? Most people that are mentally well wouldn't do that challenge, let alone just being diagnosed with, everything that I've just been diagnosed with. But it just goes to show, doesn't it, how far we can push ourselves when need be.
Yeah, totally agree with you. I also think that there is something really magical almost about those moments where all that daily BS and comfort is stripped. That's why people go climbing extreme mountains and stuff, because there's life is very simple then, isn't it? It's just you against the nature,
Yeah,
and all you think about is surviving the next day, surviving the next step. Um, so in
yeah.
a way, things are much simpler, maybe not more comfortable, but much simpler. Um, once
I
you,
think we complicate it.
yeah, oh, totally. And
I
I
think
think,
we complicate it.
yeah, and I
Mm,
think life is more and more complex these days, isn't it? Including, social
mm.
media and having access to each other 24/7 and so on. I think things have changed a lot. So once you have completed your walk, what happened then? What have you done then?
So after I completed the walk, I wrote a report on my findings, and what I found were inadequacies within the mental health services for people like myself that had experienced a dual diagnosis. Where were the gaps? And it was generally in education funding. So I wrote a report of my findings, but also where there was a lack of funding in the mental health services for people to access it, but to get the help they needed early on. And again, it just came down to funding. So my thought around this was, well, maybe I need to go and show officials, on what I thought were officials at the time that had any form of control over this, which were government. So I wrote a report on my findings, evidenced it, and I walked it from my hometown of Swindon to number 10 Downing Street and had a conversation with David Cameron, who was a prime minister at the time, to see what he could do to change this dire situation that people were experiencing. To this day, it's still ongoing work that many of us, including yourself, are lobbying for. It's what we do every single day to help others. But sadly, we see this as it will be something for the government to change. But more and more people are realizing this is something that we can do at an individual level. And
Mm,
this is why we do what we do, is to help people, to show people that more often than not, we need to help ourselves. And as painful as that may sound, if somebody had said to me at the time, you need to help yourself, I declined that because I didn't know how to help myself. But we need to be able to show people that asking for help isn't about giving up. It's about not giving up. But also recovery is highly likely and possible if we get
mm.
that early intervention.
I totally agree, and I agree also that a big part of recovery is learning to look after yourself. That pretty much saved my life when I realized when I had my crisis 7 or so years ago as well, when I couldn't stop drinking. I went to the hospital and I was hoping that I'd be welcome with a bunch of flowers. I'll stay there for 3 days, eat a fruit salad, and then I'll be pumped with vitamins. And 3 days later, I'll go home happy. But that didn't happen. And then I realized that nobody is coming to save me, and I have to learn how to save myself and ask for help as well. So I think it's a big part. Would you say that's why the mental health first aid courses are so popular and so good as well?
Yeah, I think the reason why my belief is that they're so popular is because everyone can access it. Everyone can access mental health, and it gives people a better, basic understanding of what some of the most common mental health issues are.
Mm,
Today has been wonderful news that there's a new release of the mental health first aid course, which enables people now to get a better understanding of it, but also there's some wonderful videos in there of how to have the conversation, how a conversation would unfold, but also how to support somebody through that conversation. Because previously it was just showing people what mental health issues were there, and how to use something called their algae action plan, which is their
hmm
framework, what they use, how to approach, how to assess, assist, listen and communicate, give support and information and encourage the person to get professional help and other help, which is a wonderful framework. But now they're showing you actually how to do that. So not only have we got case studies in there, but we've got great videos to watch. And there's also now a support app that you can be part of for 3 years, which helps to support the mental health first aider within their role. Also shows you about creating healthy boundaries and knowing your limitations. And this is really, really important, well, for all of us. Knowing your limitations, knowing that we're not mental health professionals, but giving people enough skills to say, what can I do on a first aid basis to this person can then get the proper professional help. So people need to be aware this will not make you a mental health professional, but it will give you the skills to administer that first aid response before they get the appropriate professional help.
I think it's a really valid and very important point, because from delivering courses, I see that people quite often are quite anxious about being specifically able to say that somebody is going through anxiety or depression, PTSD. The feeling is that I need to know what is going on for them to know how to help them. But actually, you only need to know that they are going through something and being recognized that maybe that's it, and not diagnose somebody. Thinking about the feedback from your attendees, your learners, what are the most common and the biggest takeaways they get from those courses?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's confidence. More often than not, it's the confidence to know what to say, to have that conversation, to know that they don't need to have all the answers. The thing with mental health is this, that most people just want to be heard. So we don't need to be professionals. We don't need to have all the answers. All we need to do is to be able to listen. And when I say listen, that's not listen to respond or offer an unwanted opinion or a solution. It's actually to say, thank you for sharing that with me. And again, most people, again, more often than not, just want to be heard. So if we keep it simple by saying thank you, always thank the person for sharing their journey of their mental health. But also then, if you're unsure, or if any of the listeners are unsure, ask this following 3 closed questions, which are, again, thank them and say, what would you like me to do with what you've just told me? Would you like me to just listen? Would you like me to escalate it? Or would you like me to help you create a plan to get the help you need? Because by doing so, you give that then back to them. And remember, we're not offering an opinion or a solution and saying what works for us, because that would be like me saying, Sam, I heard you going through a really bad time. Why don't you go and walk England? It's, what worked for me won't necessarily work for you.
Yeah.
So what we do by saying this is they might not know that they have those options. So if we say, what would you like me to do with what you've just told me? More often than not, people will say this. Nothing, just wanted you to listen. And that's it.
I think that's a big part of it, just holding the space and allowing somebody to talk about their experience, and even giving the time so they can consider. Because when we talk about our experience, then in a way it's laid out in front of us, and it's easy to understand, what am I actually experiencing? What am I going through? I think that's why coaching industry had such a big explosion, let's say such a big growth in recent years in UK, because you're paying somebody for an hour or whatever the time is to listen and ask open question, and understand what you're going through, and potentially help you through skillful questioning find the way forward. It's not about giving advice, and it's not about telling you what to do. You also do a lot of suicide first aid trainings. What I came across is that people are quite often afraid to talk to somebody who's suicidal, because of the fear that they might push somebody over the edge with what they say. Is that the case?
That is the case for a lot of people, but is it the truth? No, it's a myth. So by asking somebody that isn't thinking about suicide, are you thinking about suicide? We will not put the idea into their head.
Yeah.
But again, if we're asking somebody that is thinking about suicide, are you thinking about suicide? They won't go, well, actually, yes, I am. And yes, I'm going to do it. Suicide is very complex, and it has a history to it. So it's very rare that it happens for a single event or factor. So it's very complex, and it's a complex interplay of biological, psychological, current life events, past life
Yeah.
events, that lead a person to start thinking about suicide. I think the misconception also is that people are getting confused with thoughts of suicide and suicide actions. Now, 3.4 to 5% of the population roughly will be having thoughts of suicide. So that's roughly about 1 in 20 people. It doesn't mean every single one of those people will act on the thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're asking people there is, are you having thoughts of suicide? And again, there's there's a common misconception around wording as well. We think about, is somebody suicidal? What does that mean? It means that we're asking the wrong question here. It's not suicidal. It means, is that person having thoughts of suicide? If you think about that for a second, is a person suicidal? What does that mean? Does that mean they're having thoughts of suicide? So we need to actually be thinking about what we're asking there. Is, if that person's suicidal, does that mean that they're displaying a suicide behavior,
Mm-hmm.
which then could possibly mean that they're going to act on the thoughts? So we need to think thoughts of suicide, completely different to a suicide action.
What would you say from your experience and experience of delivering these courses? What are the most common misconceptions that people have about suicide when they come to learn about it?
Again, it's exactly what you said there, Sam. It is that by asking a person that's not thinking about suicide, that will put that idea into their head. It is a myth. It's. I'll give you. I'll share with you something that we share within the course, which is this. If I was to ask you if you would like to give me 98% of your salary every month for the next 6 years, what would you say?
Probably not, unless that's
Wonderful.
an investment.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad you didn't say yes, because this could have gone horribly wrong. But what we're trying to say at this point is, we're giving an example of, by me asking you something, I can't A, put that idea into your head, and
Yeah,
B,
yeah.
you won't act on what I tell you to say, or what I tell you or ask you. It's the same with suicide. What we are doing by saying that word suicide is simply A, breaking the stigma that's attached to it, and saying to that person, B, we're comfortable with talking about it. C, you can talk to me about it because I'm comfortable with saying and hearing about suicide. Yeah, so people have a common misconception about the training, that we're talking, doom and gloom, that we're all talking all negativity about the course. In fact, it's, we don't talk about methods or means around suicide, but what we do talk about is how to actually have a conversation with somebody that's having thoughts of suicide. Because if we're leaving it until the point where that person is then acting out their plan, they could be on a bridge or whatever it is that they're doing, that we're potentially leaving it too late.
Hmm.
Because in the majority of suicides, there are early signs that the person is thinking about suicide. More often than not, that person will tell you, consciously or unconsciously, they're in some kind of pain. And it's for us to understand what those early signs are.
Hmm. So until, if I remember correctly, 1961, the word commit suicide. Sorry, so very often the phrase commit suicide is used and have been used historically because in past days, suicide have been a crime, which is, I can't even grasp that concept. Your life is crumbling into pieces. You try to end your life, you don't succeed, and you go to prison. How stupid!
Mm.
And now we are trying to change that narrative, change the way we talk about suicide and mental health. Why language around suicide and mental health is so important?
Yeah, and it really is, going back to prior to 1961, the belief was that, that if a person tried to end their life, it was a crime. And I think that was really to deter people away from doing it, because they simply didn't know how to cope or manage or speak or talk to anybody that wanted to end their life by suicide. So what's the easiest way? We don't want people to die, so let's make it illegal for them to die. That was the belief. However, the language that we used around it is stuck. So people used to say commit suicide, like commit a crime, and it insinuates that it's illegal. And that was actually one of the reasons why that prevented me from getting the help that I needed and wanted, was simply because my belief was that it was illegal. So I didn't tell anyone. Why would I? It was classed as illegal. But I didn't know this. So we need to make it common knowledge that A, it was decriminalized in 1961, but B, using that word commit insinuates that it's illegal and adds to the stigma attached to suicide.
Yeah.
Another word that we shy away from now is the word completed, just quite simply because completed makes it sound like it was something on a to-do list, or, that it was an achievement.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. What happens when somebody fails at the attempt? What are they seeing themselves as there? A failure.
Yeah.
What's the likelihood of somebody that already feels hopeless and helpless about life reaching out for help, now knowing that they're also a failure?
Yeah, totally. And I hate the word complete as well, because first of all, it feels like you have achieved something, but also my first thought goes into games, like you're completing another level, another assignment. I hate that. So I shy away from that as well. And commit stuck so much. I can see even people who are in even doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists in social media, they still use it because it's so ingrained deeply in us. And I think that's why it's so important, the work that you do, for example, with courses, that we put a emphasis on that. What would you say would be the best steps to support somebody who is suicidal? What advice would you give to somebody who might come across somebody who is suicidal?
So if somebody was to come across somebody that is thinking about suicide, is to be open, honest, listen and care, and ask them, what's making you think about suicide? And again, allow that person to explain, allow them to tell you what's going on. Now, this might be extremely difficult to listen to, because it's, more often than not, again, we're not conditioned, or we're conditioned not to ask the question, but we're also conditioned not to hear or listen to the response, because then we think, well, that then becomes our problem.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's not for us to solve. People aren't problems to be solved, but they are there to be heard. So what our job is A, to learn the early signs, but also learn how to listen to somebody without taking on, knowing that it doesn't solely become our issue. We need to be working in partnership with other organizations and knowing where to signpost and take that person to, should they need that professional help. But I'd say, be honest, be open, be willing to listen to that person if they're telling you they're thinking about suicide. I say most people that are thinking about suicide won't act on the thoughts. So at this stage, all we're trying to figure out is what's causing you to think about suicide. Always think about what's the pain behind the thought.
It's a really good way to think about it. And what would you say to somebody who actually have those thoughts now and they are quite serious?
Okay, we take every single one as serious. If somebody was to tell me, are they serious? And what I'd like to find out from that person is, A, thank you for sharing that with me. That must be really difficult. I want you to know that there is help out there. What can we do now, A, to keep you safe? Where did those thoughts come from? And what can I do to help support you?
Nice, thank you. I want to ask you about workplace well-being specifically. What do you think businesses are missing or not doing well, in your opinion, when it comes to workplace well-being?
It is understanding the individual, because we are each individuals. Now, we could put a bowl of fruit out there, offer a gym membership, but that's only going to hit a certain demographic or certain specific people. Not everybody wants to go to the gym or likes fruit. What we need to understand is what works well for the individual. So I'll give you an example of this. Something that I use with organizations are the the bespoke wellness action plans, just quite simply because then it allows organizations to understand what the individuals need. So, what we do here is create the plan with the individual, with the organization. So the organization knows that, let's say, if I needed a Thursday off because I've got, that I go to church or whatever it is that I do, but I can make the time up and it makes me happy and it keeps me happy and it keeps me well, or, that I've got appointments that I can't miss, have to take the children to school at certain times, those kind of flexibility. It's those kind of things, those that reasonable adjustments that organizations can make. And understanding, what do we need to do? Let's say if Steve becomes unwell, what does he do to look after his own mental health and well-being? Well, Steve has told us that he goes to the gym, that he goes out running, that he watches, films at night, has a bath, the hot bath. What does he like to do? And then if I do become unwell, it's what can the organization do to support me back to doing those things, but also make reasonable adjustments for now. So that is a well-being strategy. It tends to work really well because then we get to know the individual. And this needs to be done right from the onset of employment. So on the onboarding process, people need to know, we go through and watch these videos on manual handling and lifting, health and safety.
Yeah.
It needs to be incorporated into health and safety because this is the health and safety of the individual, not the health and safety of the organization protecting themselves, making sure that you don't slip up or have an accident. But what the organization needs to do is what they need to do for your health and safety. So we're telling them it's a two-way street.
Mm. And I think the conversation when you go for a job interview has changed drastically because people are not only asking about how much money I can make, but what are you actually doing apart from me coming here doing the work? How do you look after your employees? Do you have any other programs I can get involved in sustainability and global warming, stuff like that? So I think it's a very important part of workplace culture. You have recently been diagnosed with ADHD yourself, which you're very open about. Was that a surprise for you?
Oh, gosh, no surprise at all. I kind of knew it. After Walk in England, I didn't stop there. I ran up Snowdonia, which you've been up recently.
Yeah.
Ran up Snowdonia, back down the other side, up Copper Mountain, because I got lost in one day. Ran to Buckingham Palace from Swindon and back. Cycled from Liverpool to Land's End in a matter of days. Cycled from Barcelona to Paris in 7 days. I've done many things that the average person would just look at and go, I'll give that a miss. But there were things for me that just didn't add up, and I thought I've got all the signs and symptoms of ADHD here, and so I went for the assessment, and he said, "Yeah, you've got it quite severe," which was he marked me as 6 out of 10 on the scale. So for me, I welcomed the diagnosis. Again, initially it hit me because I was like, oh, actually, it's now I've got that's real. But now it's enabled me to understand more about me. What do I like doing? What do I not like doing? What overwhelms me? What do I do when I get exhausted? What do I need to look at dietary wise? What do I need to look at on my fitness regime? All of these things that keep me well. So it's going to the gym every day, eating good food, being around people that will challenge me, not being too challenged with mundane tasks like admin, but doing the things that I enjoy, and that's okay because that keeps me well. And this was part of that wellbeing action plan, was creating that for me initially, was to let other people know what I need to do to keep me well. And it really worked well because then people could understand what I need and support me with it. So having this diagnosis was very welcomed.
So would you consider, or are you considering any medications for your ADHD?
I considered it, and then I declined it, just quite simply because one, I didn't want to put anything else into my body that I was unaware of. Could it help? Yeah, possibly. Am I prepared to take that risk? Knowing with what I'd previously been through with addiction and the medication I've been told is addictive by the practitioner, so I've declined medication. Not that I'm saying that it's a bad thing. If some people want medication, that's fine. It isn't for me, and I would prefer to deal with the symptoms holistically. So, quite often I'll need to check my blood pressures. I'll need to consider what I'm eating. I'll need to consider my environment and be more conscious about conscious living as opposed to take medication and then, suffer with the side effects. So it's a controlled drug, and they said that it is very addictive. So I've declined. With my history of taking drugs, I didn't want to risk it. And you know what? I've got to a good place now. I have my ups and down days. Like most people, I struggle, but nowhere near as bad as what I did. And I don't want it to unbalance the way
Mm.
things are for me right now.
That's a really good perspective. And as you said, I think it's a very personal choice. And I also think the part of ADHD is being prone to addictions, isn't it? Because you're looking for those dopamine hits, you're looking for that stimulation. So it's a tricky subject, the medication. Um, what are the key things that you do on a daily basis to keep your well-being level where it should be, let's say, or your well-being on a good level, should I say?
So my wellbeing strategy and something that I do every single day, I have lots of non-negotiables, which is every morning I'll get up and I'll start by having a pint of water. Then I will go to the gym religiously every single morning, just quite simply because it's now routine, but it's a routine that's kept me well, and that's where I get that dopamine hit from. So for me, it is get up, go to the gym, and then generally I'll come in, deliver training or work up until the afternoon. I don't always work all the way throughout the day. I split it up because I get energy spikes, energy surges. So when I get an energy spike, I'll go with it. I'll hyper focus, get lots of work done, but then it can leave me feeling drained for a couple of hours. So I've just got my sofa down there in the back, and I sometimes just have a nap on that for a couple of hours, and then go again. It's just learning when you're up to work with it and when you're down to rest. So for me, the non-negotiables are going to the gym, spending time out in nature. So I'll go out for a walk with friends. I'll go out with my partner. We'll talk about what's happened in our day and offload. So not everything is stored in my head. So
Hmm.
we'll often talk about what's gone on, offload it, then get on with the rest of our evening day, watch a film, watch something funny, have a bath. More often than not, most nights I'll just chill out in the bath half an hour, and again just watch something funny, and then just try to get a good night's sleep. It's difficult with ADHD
Mm.
though, because it's the whole getting off to sleep thing. But I prioritize my well-being over everything else, and I fit everything else into around that strategy of if I look after me, everything else looks after itself.
Oh, so that's a quote. That's a quote.
I
That's a
think it is. If I
that's a
look after
quote.
me, everything else looks after itself.
Nice,
You'll
nice.
see that on Facebook tonight. I'll
Yeah,
tag
you
you
will.
in.
Totally. Fantastic, Steve. I have a feeling like we could talk about your journey, your story, and what you do now for hours and hours. We had this conversation previously for 2 hours, and I felt like we just touched the surface because he's such an interesting person, and a big inspiration to myself because I have similar journey. Thank you for your time today. What I wanted to ask you now, if somebody wanted to get in touch with you to do some work with you, maybe invite you as a trainer or speaker, what is the best way to find you?
I'm primarily on LinkedIn, so they can find me on LinkedIn, Steve Carr, or you can just drop me a direct email, steve@mindcanyon.co.uk, or check out my website, www.mindcanyon.co.uk. And I just want to leave your people with this message, and it's this: asking for help isn't about giving up; it's about not giving up.
Another quote. You'll see it tomorrow on Facebook and LinkedIn. It's a very important message. My good sir, I appreciate you very much. Thank you again for your time. I really enjoyed talking to you, and hopefully you will have a chance to see each other in person very, very soon. Thank you so much.
Indeed. Thank
All
you,
the,
Sam.
all the best. Take care.
Thank you.